Türkiye için yine hukuksuzluklarla, hak ihlalleriyle, ifade özgürlüğü üzerindeki sınırlamalarla, adil olmayan yargılamalarla ve yasaklarla dolu bir yıldı 2021. Ve kendinden önceki yılları hiç de aratmadı bu konuda. Halbuki yine Cumhurbaşkanı Erdoğan'ın reform ve yeni anayasa söylemiyle girdiğimiz bir yıl olmuştu. Ancak sonundan baktığımızda evrensel hukuk normlarına, hatta yürürlükteki yasalara bile aykırı uygulamalar artık gündelik hale geldi. AİHM ve AYM kararlarının tanınmadığı, yargı bağımsızlığı, adil yargılanma güvenceleri, masumiyet karinesi, kanunilik ilkesi gibi hukukun en temel ilkelerinin görülmemiş bir düzeyde hiçe sayıldığı bir ülke artık Türkiye.
Throughout 2021, Erdogan spoke out about his promise of a new constitution and law reform at every opportunity. Of course, this constitutional discourse from a government that could not tolerate even the crumbs of freedom allowed in the current constitution, which was originally a product of a coup d'etat despite dozens of changes made, was quite ironic. Likewise, the government continued to violate the constitution every day, openly and deliberately. And now, even the judiciary's opposition to the legal order stipulated by the Constitution has been approved with a Constitutional Court decree.
Approved? All right. But what happened? The Council of Judges and Prosecutors promoted the judge who did not recognize the Constitutional Court decree, and the closure of the Constitutional Court was also included among the goals of the ruling power. The leader of Nationalist Movement Party, the junior partner of the government, frequently voiced this throughout the year. What happened was enough to reveal that the Constitution and the constitutional judiciary were effectively suspended.
While Erdogan continues to reject the separation of powers and judicial decrees he does not like at every opportunity, to neither recognize nor comply with the laws and constitutional provisions, this unlawfulness has now evolved to the point of not recognizing and complying with the international conventions signed by the country.
The government continued not to recognize the European Court of Human Rights decrees and, in Erdogan's words, to do whatever he knew best in 2021 as well. Despite the European Court of Human Rights decrees on their immediate release, businessman Osman Kavala and People's Democratic Party former co-chair Selahattin Demirtas spent 2021 in prison as well. Judicial processes which turned into an unending story to make sure Kavala's 4th year and Demirtas' 5th year under illegal arrest are extended continued throughout 2021. The Council of Europe initiated a violation procedure for Turkey for the first time.
One of the clearest examples that revealed the pure state of the judiciary in 2021 was İrfan Fidan, who is known as the prosecutor of the most critical cases for the government, climbing the career ladder at an unprecedented speed in the Turkish judiciary. Within a period of about a month, he moved from the office of the chief prosecutor to the Supreme Court, and from there he became a member of the Constitutional Court by becoming one of the highest judges of the country without even opening the cover of a file.
Erdogan, who has been solely in power for 19 years without break, announced the new reforms in 2021 against the lawlessness he was the perpetrator of. After the announcement of the Human Rights Action Plan, which turned out to be nothing more than a slogan, just like the previous thousands before it, not a single day went without rights violations. By the 6th month of the plan, the extension of powers obtained by the government during the state of emergency was actually enough to summarize everything.
Yıl sonuna geldiğimizde iktidar 6. yargı paketinin hazırlığını sürdürüyordu. Ancak şu ana kadar çıkarılan 5 paketle yargı bağımsızlığı ve tarafsızlığına ilişkin somut hiçbir adım atılmadı. Keza insan hakkı ihlallerinin önüne geçilemediği de gün gibi ortada.
Throughout this year, ruling authorities, especially Erdogan, never stopped targeting the opposition and those who criticized them by calling them terrorists, coup organizers and so on, ordering the judiciary what to do, and he even started to give tactics to the judiciary on how to act unlawfully. While the interventions made by the executive power in the judicial processes and the decisions of the prosecutor's office became established, investigations were launched against the members of the judiciary whose decisions were not liked. They were also dismissed and exiled at times.
At midnight, Turkey found out its withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention, the first binding international regulation against violence against women, with a presidential decree. It was quite illuminating to see what a state of law Turkey has become, that even an international convention could be existed in one decree signed by Erdogan when he wanted it. As women continued to defend the Istanbul Convention, they faced police preventions, violence, and detainment. At least 178 people were detained during the protests, and 23 lawsuits were filed against the protesters. Unfortunately, there were more femicides every day.
While the right to defense was being destroyed, lawyers were systematically subjected to violence in every environment they practiced their profession. They were identified with their clients and faced lawsuits. Between 2016 and 2020, a total of 546 lawyers were prosecuted, 665 lawyers were detained, and 441 were sentenced to 2,728 years in prison. The heads of the bar associations of 7 provinces were arrested. On the other hand, prosecutors' offices have become unable to take even the steps required by law without consulting the ministry. The Ministry of Justice instructed the prosecutors' offices to report the results of the trials made under the crime of insulting the president and insulting the state, and thus secretly threatened the judges and prosecutors.
Artık yargı metinlerinde hukuk yerine dinin referans alındığı Türkiye'de Ekim ayına geldiğimizde yeni adli yıl Diyanet İşleri Başkanı'nın yaptığı duayla açıldı. Ancak Temiz'in cenazesi çoktan kaldırılmıştı.
As the country became governed with the decrees and circulars of Erdogan, the authority of the parliament, which became almost completely dysfunctional, is now only on paper. For instance, the minister appointed to the mafia politics in the country targeted the opposition, scolded the elected officials and threatened them when he was supposed to give account for the things he did. The government did not even allow the establishment of parliamentary investigative commissions, which is the only option of control the parliament is capable of. When the regulations requested by the government did not pass the parliament, they were enacted as law by fait accompli and by violating the parliamentary rules of procedure. In the meantime, the number of immunity reports sent to the Grand National Assembly of Turkey during the current legislative period exceeded 1,400.
While the desperation in the foreign policy of 2021 brought the government to the winds of softening, the war warnings were still extended. In domestic politics, the politics of polarization and tension continued to exist. Meanwhile, the government's list of terrorists has expanded considerably. Journalists, right advocates, social media users, university students, women, healthcare professionals, lawyers, those who protested against ecological destruction, even kebab shop, have become the targets of the terrorism accusation. It has been claimed that every criticism made against the government was a threat to national security and national interests. It was forbidden to ask questions about the melting central bank reserves. When law enforcement forces were not enough, prosecutors, and where prosecutors were not enough, governance stepped in.
HDP yıl boyunca yine saldırıların ve baskıların ana hedefi olmaya devam ederken iktidarın küçük ortağı MHP liderinin çağrısıyla düğmeye basıldı ve parti kapatmayı zorlaştırmakla övünen iktidar HDP'nin kapatılması için dava açtırdı.
In the hastily prepared file, the party's attitude towards national issues was counted among the reasons for the closure. In the political party closure case, which came to the agenda for the first time in 13 years after being brought against the Justice and Development Party in 2008, the People's Democratic Party was accused of being affiliated with a terrorist organization and aiming to destroy the indivisible integrity of the state by receiving millions of votes in the elections.
Right after the People's Democratic Party lawsuit was filed, there were images reminiscent of the 90s in the parliament. More than a quarter of a century after the Democracy Party deputies were taken into custody 27 years ago, People's Democratic Party parliament member Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu was detained in the parliament. A few days later, Gergerlioğlu was beaten by the police at his home in Ankara, dragged underground, taken into custody and put in prison. Gergerlioğlu regained his freedom after about 3 months with a constitutional court decree and was reinstated as a parliament member.
While the government openly encouraged attacks against the opposition, there were armed attacks against People's Democratic Party buildings. A young woman named Deniz Poyraz was murdered in the Izmir provincial organization, which was under constant police blockade. While the attacker, whose photos were taken with weapons in the state inventory in Syria, was arrested at jet speed, an investigation was launched against People's Democratic Party co-chair Pervin Buldan, who said to treat the murderer like a murderer, in the lawsuit filed against the attacker, who was almost patted in the back, first by the police and then by the judiciary.
On the other hand, trustee operations continued against municipalities. According to the data of the Human Rights Association, after the local elections in 2019, the co-mayors of 49 municipalities, including 3 metropolitan cities, 5 provinces, 33 districts, and 8 towns, were dismissed and trustees were appointed to replace them. 31 co-mayors were arrested. By the end of 2021, Istanbul and Ankara were placed on the target board of the government operations against municipalities.
2021 yılı Susurluk skandalından 25 yıl sonra Türkiye'de mafyanın nasıl devletleştiği, devletin de nasıl mafyalaştığını bir kere daha gözler önüne serdi.
There were allegations in the videos published by criminal organization leader Sedat Peker, who was known with his close ties to the government and was targeting and threatening the oppositional sections of the society until recently. The allegations of Peker brought the relations between the mafia, state and politics back on the agenda. At this point, the events that happened when the country turned into a conflict area for the names prosecuted from deep state structures and mafia leaders in the 90s, when Erdogan's government allowed it, showed that many things have continued as before since the Susurluk scandal.
Covid-19 salgını yıl boyunca gündemden hiç düşmedi. İktidar salgınla mücadeleyi verileri gizlemekle sürdürdü. Salgınla değil, bilimle ve sağlık meslek örgütleriyle mücadele etmeyi tercih etti. Resmi verilere göre salgının başından bu yana kayda geçen her 4 ölümden 3'ü 2021 yılında meydana geldi.
The government continued to turn the pandemic into an opportunity in terms of prohibitions. The pandemic bans, which did not touch Erdogan and his party, became the pretext for banning even the smallest voice that would oppose the government. Women, workers, students were prevented by the law enforcement all over the country, beaten and detained on the pretext of the ban decrees issued by the governments.
Erdoğan faiz sebep enflasyon neticedir sloganıyla ve ben ekonomistim, ben ekonominin kitabını yazdım diyerek ekonomi alanında büyük yıkımlara neden oldu.
The economy of the country is dying, just like the democracy of the country, and the president of the central bank was changed 4 times in the last 3 years, and the minister of finance 3 times in the last 12 months. The rise in the US dollar exchange rate has reached a record high. The Turkish lira lost its value by almost 100% in 1 year. Central bank reserves disappeared. The annual inflation rate rose to 36.08%, reaching the highest level in the last 19 years. New price increases were made, while poverty and unemployment increased day by day. Criticizing Erdogan's self-styled economic theory has become a crime.
Birçok üniversitenin rektörü ya eski partili vekil, ya vekil adayı ya da vekil yakını olduğu Türkiye'de 2021 yılında üniversite kapılarına polis kelepçesi vurulduğunu da gördük.
We had just entered 2021 when Erdogan appointed Justice and Development Party member Melih Bulu as the rector of Boğaziçi University with the Midnight Decree. Thus, for the first time since the military coup of September 12, 1980, a person from outside the university has been placed in the rectorate seat, Boğaziçi. Wherever the ineffective rector elections in universities were abolished with the power of state of emergency, and all the authority in the rectorate elections, as in everything else, is now solely with Erdogan. Thereupon the resistance started by students and academics saying, "We do not want a trustee rector," continued throughout the year. The first action of the trustee rector was to turn the university into a police station. Over 1,000 students were detained in protests throughout the year. 13 of them were arrested, 29 people were placed under house arrest. As far as we can determine, in many cases, more than 200 students are on trial.
Türkiye'deki mevcut ceza yasaları ifade özgürlüğünün önündeki en büyük engeller olmayı sürdürüyor. Ceza kanunlarında milleti ve devleti aşağılamak, cumhurbaşkanına hakaret, halkı kin ve düşmanlığa tahrik, kamu görevlisine hakaret, örgüt üyeliği ve propaganda suçlarını içeren maddeler başta olmak üzere mevzuattaki birçok düzenleme gerek anayasanın gerekse uluslararası hukukun koruduğu temel hak ve özgürlükleri kullanan yurttaşları cezalandırmak için 2021 yılında da kullanılmaya devam edildi.
According to the 2020 Justice statistics announced by the Ministry of Justice last September, 31,297 investigations were opened for insulting the president in just 1 year. The total number of investigations opened since Erdogan was elected president in 2014 has exceeded 160,000. In more than 35,000 cases opened, 38,608 people were defendants, 12,881 citizens were convicted, and the sentences were postponed for 11,913 citizens. However, the number of lawsuits filed on the same charges during the 5 presidential terms before Erdogan was 1,816. This clearly reveals the function in the Article 299 of the Turkish Criminal Code has gained.
2021 was another year of oppression and censorship for journalists. According to the data of the Journalists Union, 34 journalists and media workers are still in prison in Turkey. According to the data of the Contemporary Journalists Association, there were 179 lawsuits against journalists and press organizations in 2021. In these lawsuits, 219 journalists were put on trial. According to the data shared by the Dicle Fırat Journalists Association, 61 journalists were detained and 6 journalists were arrested in 2021. 51 journalists were prosecuted. In the concluded cases, 47 journalists were sentenced to a total of 133 years, 8 months, and 21 days in prison, and a total fine of 72,206 Turkish liras.
In a 1-year period, the Radio and Television Supreme Council issued a total of 74 fines, including suspension of broadcasts on national channels for their critical broadcasts against the government. The monetary amount of the fines amounted to approximately 22 million Turkish liras. The Press Advertisement Institute also imposed a total of 115 days of advertising penalty against 4 newspapers.
Despite the decree of the Council of the State, the government added articles to the press card regulation which were open to interpretation and thus may increase arbitrariness in the issues at cancelling of cards. The General Directorate of Security of the Ministry of Interior issued a circular prohibiting the display of law enforcement in social events and tried to unlawfully hinder the citizens' only means of protection in the face of ever-increasing and reckless violence by the law enforcement. By the end of the year, the Council of State suspended the execution of both.
Anayasanın 34. maddesinde güvence altında bulunan toplantı ve gösteri hakkı, valilikler tarafından ilan edilen yasaklama kararlarıyla bazı kentlerde aylardır, bazı kentlerde ise yıllardır kullanılamaz hale getirilmiş durumda. Mülki idareler artık adrese teslim yasaklar bile ilan edebiliyor. Anayasal güvence altındaki bir hakkın kullanımının idare eliyle engellenmesi öyle boyutlara vardı ki Van'da eylemler kesintisiz olarak 5 yıldır yasak.
According to the statistics of the Ministry of Justice in Turkey, nearly 12,000 citizens were convicted in more than 63,000 lawsuits filed in 7 years with the allegation of violating the law in meetings and demonstrations, and the announcements of the verdicts were deferred for more than 9,400 citizens. In 2021, opposition parties, unions, professional organizations, health workers fighting at the forefront of the pandemic, workers seeking their rights, women protesting against femicides, students demanding a democratic university, in short, citizens from all walks of society faced bans and violence by the law enforcement.
According to the data of the Monitoring Association for Equal Rights, in the first 9 months of 2021, the right to meetings and demonstration was restricted, with a total of 236 civil administration decrees, 182 general and 54 specific. At least 510 peaceful demonstrations were intervened and over 3,000 citizens were detained. According to the data of the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, 40 of the citizens detained due to peaceful demonstrations were arrested, 132 people were sentenced to more than 124 years of imprisonment and fined a total of 63,000 Turkish liras in the concluding cases. According to the data of the Human Rights Association, at least 3,671 people were subjected to torture in peaceful demonstrations and at least 415 people in official places of detention.
İktidar 2020 yılının Ekim ayında yürürlüğe soktuğu sosyal medya düzenlemesinin üzerinden bir yıl dahi geçmeden yeni bir sansür düzenlemesinin hazırlıklarına başladı bile.
Among the 658 censored news items analyzed by the Media Research Association, which prepared a report on the social media regulation that came into effect in October, corruption and irregularity ranked first with 336 items and misuse of duty with 308 items. The ones who demanded the most censorship were the people having titles of business person, ministers, and high-level bureaucrats.
According to the data of the Freedom of Expression Association, the number of websites with access bans in 2015 was 80,000. This increased by 5 times and reached 467,000 at the beginning of 2021, while also 150,000 URLs, 7,500 Twitter accounts, 50,000 tweets, 12,000 YouTube videos, 8,000 Facebook content, 6,800 Instagram posts were censored. This practice continued in 2021, reaching even more dire dimensions.
During many events during the year, such as wildfires, flood disasters, economic crisis, cross-border military operations, corruption, and the pandemic, the first action of the government was to restrict social media applications and start an operation against social media posts. In social media operations, legal action was taken against 39,601 people in 8 months. 1,175 people were detained and 52 people were arrested. During the year, 64 online news sites were shut down and access to 1,460 news and 160 social media contents were banned.
LGBTQ+ continued to be the target of hatred from the representatives of the government throughout 2021, as in previous years. Pride Week events were also banned in 2021. The police attacked the events in Istanbul, Ankara, and Eskişehir. 6 separate lawsuits were filed against 40 people detained during the Istanbul Pride Parade.
In addition to racist attacks against Kurds, hate speech targeting immigrants has now turned into hate crimes. According to the data of the Human Rights Association and the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, 9 people lost their lives in the first 11 months of 2021 as a result of racist and hateful attacks.
Impunity continued to exist in 2021 as a widespread and systematic state practice. The cries of justice rising from the courthouses went unanswered. Erdogan did not keep his promise to Berfuana. The fate of the torture files was once again non-prosecution, and justice has not come to Roboski for 10 years. On the other hand, in crimes in which the police were the perpetrators, evidence was obfuscated and appointments were made to circumvent the prohibition of comments reflecting bias and lawsuits filed against police officers. On the other hand, according to the data of the Human Rights Association, 42 civilians, including 20 children, have died under armored law enforcement vehicles since 2008. According to the data of the Baran Tursun Foundation, 413 people have lost their lives in the 14 years since the police's authority to use guns has been expanded with a change in the law.
2021 Türkiye'sine şimdiye kadar hep içeriden baktık. Hadi gelin bir de dünyadan bakalım.
In Freedom House's 2021 report, Turkey was again included in the non-free countries category as in previous years. Turkey became the second country in the world where freedoms have declined the most. In the organization's report, Freedom on the Net 2021, Turkey was once again listed among the countries where the internet is not free.
For the second time, Erdogan has been included in the Reporters Without Borders Enemies of Press Freedom list, which includes 37 heads of state and government around the world. Turkey ranked 153rd this year in the organization's 2021 Press Freedom Index.
In the 2021 Global Democracy Report of the International Democracy and Election Support Institute, Turkey has been among the countries whose democracy has declined the most in the last 10 years.
Turkey ranked 117th among 139 countries in the Rule of Law ranking in the 2021 World Justice Project Index. It is the last one among 13 countries in the Eastern Europe and Central Asia group in the index.
According to Free Muse's annual report, government officials are responsible for more than 90% of violations of artistic freedom of expression in Turkey. The anti-terror law and the crime of insulting the president are behind more than half of the violations of artistic freedom of expression in Turkey.
In the Global Rights Index report, in which the International Trade Unions Confederation evaluates the countries of the world in terms of workers' rights every year, Turkey was placed among the 10 worst countries for workers this year.
İşte koca bir yıl böyle geçti. 23 Ocak 1995 tarihinde İstanbul Devlet Güvenlik Mahkemesi avlusunda yola çıkan düşünce suçuna karşı girişim de 27. yaşına erişti. Geçen bunca yılda çok şey değişti elbet. Ancak görüldüğü üzere bazı şeyler de hiç değişmiyor. Biz yine de yeni yıldan umutlu olalım. Keza insan düşlerinin büyüklüğü kadar özgürdür.